Hello, everybody. Hello, hello. I'm Dr. Thunder. This is Case Closed. Case Closed. And today's topic, $5 million reparations in San Francisco. You better start moving. Bros better start relocating. Because if this money comes down, I don't know. I'm starting to look at properties. Anyhow, so given that California never practiced slavery, does San Francisco or any part of California owe reparations to blacks? If so, and under what? What is the auspices under which we owe? In under what interpretation of culpability is money owed? Given that San Francisco is dealing with a serious budget deficit, do you think this is just a symbolic gesture? And how realistic is this proposal? I do think that opening up the sort of discussion, seeming to have something on paper, will tend to have the impact of taking a little bit of the wind out of the sail. And you do know that black folks love symbolism. Not so much actual substance, but we love symbolism. Would you support Chinese reparations? They might have a more valid claim against San Francisco. Uh-oh. We smuggling in Chinese again. And what is the end goal? The payment of an amount that is fairly due. The Texas Education Agency, DEA, has taken over the Hudson School District due to poor performance. I don't know, maybe they should take over a lot more. Because California is full of a bunch of subpar schools, especially inner city schools. And what is the right balance of resources versus correct allocation of resources when it comes to school performance? What should we expect? I mean, we're paying taxes. What kind of performance should we require out of these public institutions? And our schools owed, or rather overburdened, with top-heavy administration, thereby removing focus from the students and teaching. This and much more today on Case Closed. Let's go. What's happening? Take it
What's up?
away.
What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up? Coming in live and direct from Accra, Ghana. This is Ike. Well, this, ladies and gentlemen, is Case Closed. All right, where you have the highest level conversations on the most relevant topics anywhere on YouTube. The highest level conversations. Yes, I challenge you to put that to the test and to smash that like button, as they say, and share the stream. You've already heard about what we're going to be discussing today. It's going to be on reparations and education. Okay, now let's lay down some facts on the table. Okay, let's lay down some facts. The city appointed African American Reparations Committee, which is tasked with how to atone for centuries of slavery and systemic racism in San Francisco. So it was appointed by the city. Proposes payments of $5 million to each eligible black adult. So over 18, I assume, and eligibility, they have some formula for figuring that out. The elimination of personal debt and tax burdens. Now that's a big one. Okay, personal debt and tax burdens, and then guaranteed annual income of at least $97,000 for 250 years. So checks going out till after you pass. Um, that'll be a nice one. Speaking of the whole generational wealth type thing, and homes in San Francisco for $1. Now that's another nice one, given the fact that we're talking about homes in San Francisco, where homes are ridiculously priced. So, Dr. Thunder, let's start with you. We're going to start small. We're going to start small, and that we'll start with the first question that you alluded to in your opening remarks. I've heard you mention, Dr. Thunder, that the main thing for you when it comes to reparations is a, shall we say, logical, some may even say legalistic frame that says, is it owed or not? So, to whom is it owed, and by whom, should this burden, who bears responsibility for discharging this burden, right? So, given that California never practiced slavery, does San Francisco, okay, or any part of California owe reparations? Now, if you were in a court of law, is that a yes? Is that a no? And if it's a yes, how would you construe that word owe and culpability, to fit California and San Francisco? What do you say, Dr. Thunder?
Yeah, this is a complex question. Um, so, since California was not in the slave game, as it were, uh, why should they have to pay? So that seems to be another way to ask the question. Um, but then again, reparations is not just about slavery. And could we argue that California has been involved in systemic racism against black people? Hollywood is in California, and there's been uh, significant money made using minstrel show images of black people, and continues to be made based on generations of racist images, stereotypes depicting black men as you know rapacious braggarts, as brutes, as animals, as subhuman, um, gangbangers, everything else. And regardless as to who has been the primary consumer of these images, California certainly, I may argue, is most responsible for these uh, negative images. Um, so I would argue that yes, they do owe, because they've been involved, perhaps not in slavery, but they have been involved um, in this slavery enterprise. The all of what transpired after it. So
Okay, so A, reparations is not all about slavery. It's about what you may call systemic racism and the post-slavery situation, if you will. Now, would you? I just want to just to follow up on the point there. Would you then look at each state differently? Say, okay, California did X, Mississippi did Y, for example. Is everybody as as culpable as Mississippi, for example, right? Um, in other words,
yep.
California participated in a certain aspect of, but Mississippi did X, Y, Z. Some people only did A, B, that kind of thing. Would you get into that mode at all?
I mean, that's a possible strategy. I think once they actually make the decision that they're going to go ahead and actually do reparations. If they are actually going to do it, then I think you can start talking about some of those okay, well, how much is owed and how are you going to do it and all that kind of stuff. I don't think that's um that issue that you raise is a you know I don't see a problem with that. I don't see a problem with being more
Mhm.
nuanced with the way that you do it. Okay, I'm good with that. But that you're
Okay.
even going to do it at all is is more of an issue because a general, a general approach, a usual approach to sort of poo-poo something from the beginning is to start to get down into a bunch of nuances when you know you're not going to do it in the first place. You bring up
Hmm.
stuff that, oh, see, here's the logistical barriers, and this is all like this. Yeah, but y'all weren't going to do it anyway.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, that is the typical way in which things are poo-pooed. But also, it's also quite natural that, especially once an amount is mentioned in any negotiation, that's when the negotiation actually starts, right? Like when somebody says something, that's when everyone's like, "Oh, well, but how about this and how about that and how about the third?" And if we stay within this legalistic frame, is what I'm trying to stay within, because I think to start with, it's a clean frame to stay within. Um, Kaiser, what do you think? Number one, does California owe? Dr. Thunder said, hey, it's not just all about slavery. So they have participated in some other aspects like exploitation. Um, but other people are also, now this is does not negate the fact that because you injured one, you injured three people, that you don't owe the first person. That's not what I'm trying to say here. But it does open up the fact that there are other people that have been exploited by California and Hollywood also, right? Direct exploitation of the Chinese by California and Hollywood. So I'm muddying the waters a little bit here because if you were in front of the Supreme Court, these are the kinds of things that people that would come up. So Kaizo, can you expound upon the area that we're in right now? Dr. Thunder haven't started with, yes, they did participate in the quote unquote post slavery enterprise and exploitation. Okay. And what are your thoughts on this?
Well, let's not bring up other stuff, otherwise, we already dirty the water. But I will say, sticking it to the slavery stuff, Rico, man, you're talking about legalistic stuff. This is part of the American gang that is profiteering from other elements of the profits coming from the institutional slavery. So if you're sticking just simply to the legalistic approach, yes, California is culpable because it's a RICO case against the gang that is known as the United States government.
Good.
Yep. Yep.
Yes, that approach is what I like that approach. Again, just legalistically thinking in terms of the framework, it's like, well, you cannot start dividing up these states and such. And if you're talking about, some part of a corporation that did something, you cannot then just say that the head of the corporation, like the coffers, the financial coffers of the head, or everyone is tainted. Basically, is what you're saying, right? Everyone is tainted. The headquarters has to pay along with everybody else. And this is rather interesting that San Francisco is taking an approach of being a city, a rather small city, by the way. A lot of people don't know that San Francisco is small geographically, and also doesn't really have many residents there. But a city taking this upon itself is a novel approach to the whole question. Okay, now, Dr. Thunder, you alluded to the whole symbolism, and San Francisco is dealing with a serious budget deficit at the moment. Okay, and some people are saying that this is going to cost the city way over $50 billion. Actually, as a matter of fact, the San Francisco NAACP, okay, is arguing back and forth within itself. And one of the aspects of the argument, we'll get to some other aspects later, is that this thing will never pass. This $5 million will never pass. That's why they want a different kind of program. It's like, hey, there is no way in the current financial environment of San Francisco, and what seems to be the perpetual environment of San Francisco, I mean, that they're horribly mismanaged. Okay, these people don't know what to do with money. Okay, it's I don't want to get triggered and get into. It's ridiculous how many billions comes into California from the tech industry when there's a boom period, and the next year it's all gone. It just disappears. So, and then they're like, oh, what happened? So there's this pushback saying that this will never happen. That, hey, we need something that's more realistic. This $5 million and 200 and $97,000 and all this kind of stuff. What do you think about that? You've
First
already
of all,
mentioned
let me
that
ask
you're already
why. I have got a question. Why are they separating all those things? Why not just turn it into one asset, money? I just add all those things there and say, okay, well, this is. I don't know why
fine.
they're separate.
Yeah, fine. They can separate they can put it all one big lump sum. The question is, it's less likely to happen unless you structure it in some other way in which people are talking about, such as certain programs and
Oh no,
access and
man.
this and
They
that,
believe
affirmative
redlining still
actions
applies.
of several kinds, blah blah blah, right? But first Dr. Thunder and then Kaizo, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so reframe the question. 'Cause I got distracted with
There
the
is with the chat.
no, not with the chat. With Kaizo's comment.
So there is a pushback saying that it is unrealistic and it will not happen. That basically this amount and the way in which it's phrased, given the financial situation of San Francisco, will never pass muster. And some of it, as a matter of fact, but anyways, the general idea is that if you frame it in ways that seem to be more in the mode of affirmative action and access to certain kind of programs and things like that, it is more realistic and more likely to pass. If you come out and say $5 million and $250,000 and a free home, and that, it's just a sign that they're not serious. That this is never going to happen.
Yeah,
What are your thoughts?
That's true. That's true. And you kind of know when they talking about $5 million per person and all like this. That ain't real. That's right. That's not real. That's not actually going to happen. I actually I like Larry Sharp's approach to this whole thing, which basically incentivizes private individuals to partner with descendants of slavery, which creates ownership for the descendants of slavery. It incentivizes private individuals, with big dollars, to partner with descendants of slavery. And then there's a bunch of education and other things that incentives in his plan, but that seems to be a much better, more practical way about this. One thing I do like about, and this is an interesting strategy, and perhaps represents some actual movement in the approach. So historically, the approach was we're going to get our money from the federal government, and so all of the sort of lobbying and politicking was always about the feds are the ones that owe us the money. We're going to go get the money from the feds. But some of these newer approaches where they're like, okay, well, California, which is not the feds, we're going to camp out there. We're going to say California. Let's see if we can get California to pay up. Then potentially we can force others to do the same thing. Other large states. If California does it, then probably the next one looking at it is probably going to be something like New York. And then if New York does it, then the next place is going to be probably some other East Coast stuff, and before long, a lot of these other states will start to get pressured into adopting some sort of reparations policy. But obviously it's not going to be $5 million per person. That's not going to happen. So yeah, they need a different strategy that they could actually do. It also makes it so San Francisco, who can't manage their money, they also the ones that are coming up with this idea. which tells you,
yeah, I guess
the whole
it's
thing
not
is
very surprising,
hogwash.
right?
Right. Of course they're going to be the ones, because they're the ones that can't manage their own money. Of course they're going to be the ones that come up with this goofy stuff. So, you need some better, better ideas. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I like what you talked about, the whole tip of the spear kind of modality there. It tends to happen that way in the United States, anyways, and that's why local politics is very important. Because if you're looking at any particular aspect, like of let's say education or healthcare, for example, I think a huge part of the Affordable Healthcare Act, Obamacare, was taken from Mitt Romney's program in Massachusetts when he was over there, right? So you have these, each state and each municipality being kind of like an experiment. People pass different kinds of things, and people are looking around, they're shopping, they're seeing, wait, what works, right? And that's the beauty of the United States. If you have some kind of an idea, you can always ask, is anybody practicing it? And there's a chance that someone is practicing some form of it, and you say what works, and then you copy 100%. And then you're talking about Larry Sharp's idea, agreeing with the fact that this kind of approach is not realistic, but something about private partnership, perhaps a more libertarian idea that will use something more in the market, incentivize the market to do X, Y, or Z, which the government is constantly incentivizing the market in all kinds of ways, mainly through taxes and regulations and other kinds of things. So why not incentivize them to partner, as you say, with descendants of slaves, give them ownership, and presumably it will. One pushback on that I just kind of came up with now is, the San Francisco types, the really forward-leaning liberal types, will say this is just going to perpetuate the uh, hierarchy. Okay, because the people that are going to be partnered with, okay, are going to be privileged black people who happen to have skills and can actually bring something to the table, which is the enemy of certain types. Right? Like, how dare you perpetuate that? We want to give the money, anyways. Let me not go too far with that. But that's
look. So I'm gonna tell you. I'm gonna tell you what I actually think of this. Okay. Now this is gonna sound really. This is gonna sound. What is the word I want? Not skeptical. Not sarcastic. I mean, this is gonna seem real jaded and real
cynical.
Cynical. Yeah, that's the word I want. This is gonna sound cynical. All right. So, given the location that has said we give them $5 million a person like this, and what that area historically has been known for as far as SJWs and whatnot, you know what always is the approach, right? Let's use black folks. Let's pretend like we care about the black folks, especially black men. Let's care like we care. Let's act like we care. And then let's do the bait and switch. And then, so now that you have set up this architecture, this structure for reparations for black people, now they can get in what they actually want. So, yeah, and I don't have to actually say the words, but I think we know what I'm saying, or the letters.
So, Kaizo, what do you think? You in the last statement you made, you said, "Hey, why don't they just lump it all together, make one big lump sum?" And the general idea is, well, that is less likely to pass, right? It just doesn't work, and we know that these things are going to be pushed back against in the court of law, and so on and so on and so on. So you want something that can pass muster, uh, politically and legally. So what do you think about some of the kinds of ideas that Dr. Thunder uh, proposed, through Larry Sharp, right? Or do you think that such things as $5 million and $250,000, well, not $250,000, but $97,000 for 250 years, do you think that such things actually are feasible? What are your thoughts in general?
Yeah. So okay. So I want to start by saying that this committee was actually created just to simply find the total cost. Right? They were just simply appraisals. So their job is not try to get it through the court. That's our job. Their job was just, hey, you've asked us to do a job. This is the appraisal for the destruction of the black family and the people that were obviously forcibly put into some, bad conditions. So I think the numbers that they came up with is actually very conservative. Realistically, it should be 50 million per person, right? Why? Because we know what they did. These people committed crimes against humanity. So, that's the highest level of crime according to their own bill. So, whatever, that's a whole separate issue. So, we'll talk about the feasibility of it passing. First, there has to be an acknowledgement that if they do pay out, that this conversation ends. If they don't do that, then there is no incentive for America to pay off, right? This gang, if it's always going to be judged, and that judgment has some kind of authority, whether it's moral, societal, or otherwise, if again we can always rejudge America, then it's not in America's best interest to pay out because, well, why, right? You want to make sure that there is some kind of acknowledgement that we, the black people, as a total, there has to be some kind of vote that once this payout is made, we acknowledge that America has paid for its sins and it's passed. If that acknowledgement doesn't exist, I think this will be a weak transaction. Whether they pay it or not, it won't change the underlying issues of, let's say, integrating America, regardless of race, into a unified sort of system. Now, $97,000 a year for 250 years, that part, I don't know if that's necessary because obviously, I just get lump sum, give each person $5 million, leave it at that, and every single black person that's descended of the First Nations people over here, right? They should get their money, man. And, they can invest back in Africa and join the Pan African movement.
Okay. And so, Dr. Thunder, Kaiser brought up an interesting aspect here that I've heard Glenn Lowry bring up. Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter, shout out to them. And that's the aspect of after the check is cut, you're going to hear somebody say, well, don't you think don't think that puts it to end, right? Oh, they call them the people with three names. Michael, it's kind of funny because they call them the people with three names, and there's so many of them that actually have three names. Such I only remember one right now, Michael Eric Dyson, for example. Okay, and there's a whole Ibram X Kendi. There's a whole kind of gang where there's a three-name gang. So that type of person, it's almost like they cannot help them but to say the very next day, well, don't you think that this puts it all over? Oh, don't you think you could just dismiss 400 years of blah, blah, blah? What do you think about what Kaizo says, which is basically say, hey, if we're going to do this, there's got to be some kind of rapprochement, some kind of understanding that, hey, you can't keep bringing this, we can't keep doing this over and over and over again, right? Or what are your thoughts about that?
And this is actually one of the reasons why the number needs to be big enough. Mm-hmm. Right? Because if it is a small number or, the sort of benefit package that they set up doesn't really support the folks. I mean, it supports some folks, but it doesn't really support, a significant percentage of the affected folks. Then, then that's something that we got to look at. Let's see here. Let's bring up.
We got Mr. IC3 coming up. It maybe I assume. Okay,
Yeah,
but ladies and gentlemen, there he is.
Am I coming through?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. But here, but
Okay.
just to to finish up here, I do think that the number has to be a significant enough number to sort of be able to reference the number, and then that shuts people up. Let's say, so how much more than 50 million are we supposed to give people? That kind of a thing.
What do you think about the moral aspect?
Gave people 50 million.
People are gonna, because they are, and don't mean to interrupt, but perhaps you can add this, because there is this general, the kind of people who say we need to have a conversation about, or we need to come to terms with, with those kinds of people, right?
Yeah.
They are the types that have something else in mind, okay, where the money perhaps is just a means towards their ends, which is something about perpetuating guilt, shame, blame. They're in the moral arena, right? They're doing some kind, playing some kind of witchcraft in there, right? Where nothing is ever enough. And after the money, then how about the celebrations and the rituals and the thises and the that's, and you guys have to paint your face green. Those are the kinds of things that those people will want. We don't have to take them seriously, but perhaps you could you could have to have
you need like a race purge, like
some kind of
so where the black folks could just go out and just like indiscriminately kill people as long as they're not black. I'm sorry. That we've divulged quite a bit. So anyhow, yeah, I mean, that is a challenge. That's always a challenge. But I also think that I don't know that is a valid argument against reparations. Again, it's one of these things where they say, but if we do this, then people are going to claim that it wasn't enough. And that just seems like okay, so that's really your reason for not paying people what they're owed, is because if you pay them something, they're going to claim that it's not enough. Well, you shouldn't have enslaved folks, and you shouldn't have, redlining.
That's right.
And everything else for all this time. We're supposed to see that as like a valid. that's a valid argument. So you have clearly profited from this enterprise, and that's really your reason. It's kind of like that. So anyhow.
Yeah. And to steel man the point, if we were to put it in the way that Glenn Lowry and or John McWhorter would put it, it is not a question about whether the validity of reparations. It is looking at the body politic, if you will, and then the future, saying, hey, if this is going to happen, we got to make sure that we don't keep on bringing it back up. It's just, because there's no need to explain it. This is a human relations thing, right? Because if you're just asking for, then where does it end, kind of thing, right? But Mr. IC3, welcome. Okay, you now have your chance to open.
Yes, hot topic, reparations. That's the topic.
This is your one issue.
There's nothing more important than that.
But you see how black people are? He was even late to his own topic.
Yeah, he's like, you couldn't even click the link. So, ladies and gentlemen, again, the city appointed African American.
Sorry, go on.
So let me just go ahead. Oh yeah. It's every once in a while. Sometimes it should be every other week. It'll be on Dr. Thunder's channel where he uses Ecamm Live. Blah blah blah. It was in the email, but black people don't read. Black people. I said it there. It's gonna be on Dr. Thunder. Anyways, city appointed African American Reparations Committee tasked with how to atone for centuries of slavery and systemic racism. Payments of $5 million to every eligible black. Okay, elimination of personal debt and tax burdens, guaranteed annual incomes of at least $97,000 for 250 years, homes in San Francisco for $1. Okay, now this will cost the city minimum of $50 billion, they're saying. But let's ask you the question that we kind of
To be honest, the
started
money
with
will just
here.
go back to white people anyway, since black people
Oh,
love to spend.
that's a separate question, as we
Exactly.
know.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
separate
Okay.
question,
Yeah.
completely separate
Yeah.
question. Okay, now there's some people
Yeah.
who may want to use who look at the reparations thing as a general, like a political, as some kind of a fuel for funding an engine, and they would be the ones interested in building such an engine, right?
Right.
Because otherwise it'll just dissipate. But this has nothing to do with whether it's old or not, right? As we know, right? But then there's the question of, hey,
Right.
can we harness it and use it for something useful, or just have it dissipate? Now, Mr. IC3, would you make a distinction between which particular governmental entities in the United States? You have different states. California never had slavery, for example. And some people may say, hey, but California never had slavery. Why should California be doing this? How would you make such a distinction? Or would you have more of a broad based, wide sweeping, hey, this is one big enterprise and they all owe? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I would say that it's one big, very big enterprise, and that the commission that was set up to investigate reparations, I see that as a party its purpose is to stand between the state and a separate entity, a black entity that has a global view of reparations. Yes, because what happened to the people classified as black um, is global. And so just trying to localize it to California and that local, no, that should be just an entity that discuss with a larger, a more powerful global entity. It's an intermediary entity between another global black entity that's seeking reparations for Black Africa and the Black African diaspora, and communicating with the state on the issue of reparations through this commission.
Okay. And Mike V in the chat. Yes, you are in the email. Yeah, it's I don't know what happened this Sunday. Is there some kind of special ADOS thing going on where you guys are specifically, challenged? But yeah, every week the same email goes out, and I think you are part of it, Mike V. If you're not, then that would be my bad. I don't know how you may have been.
If it's not, you could quickly resend one, I guess, for him.
Yeah. You can respond, please. If you don't see yourself in the email, please go ahead and respond. Okay. Now we're around this area of we have departed from the area of what's the end goal, right? Is it a fair amount due, or is there a question about moral grandstanding, some theater, some fodder for writing books, some kind of way in which to maybe justify one's station in life by way of excuse and say, hey, it's the white people's fault? Ta-Nehisi Coates, which is also a three-name person because Ta is one name. Anyways, Ta-Nehisi Coates does say that there's nothing wrong with, and I want to ask you this, Dr. Thunder, it just came to mind right now. Ta-Nehisi Coates has a quote that there is nothing wrong with ADOS people that getting rid of white supremacy can't fix. Okay? Now, it's a big kind of thing where you can sweep all kinds of things into that bucket of white supremacy, where anything you say, right? Anything you say, he'll then say, oh, that's just also white supremacy.
But
how about this?
there's no
Oh,
such
it's
thing as white supremacy, though, Ike, right?
Yeah, but
You've never
hold
seen
on. Let Dr. Thunder respond to that. What do you think about Ta-Nehisi Coates' quote? He says that there's nothing wrong.
One second. Here, I gotta make an adjustment here.
Cool. I guess Mike V did get
Mike
the
V
email.
and let's see here. Who is this here? This needs to be Kaizo. And
click that like button,
Kaizo's-
share the stream. Okay, click the like button,
All right,
share
put my
the
button
stream.
here.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about reparations and education. Yes.
All right, so ask me the question one more time.
Ta-Nehisi Coates said something, and I was just kind of saying this on way of kind of I was gonna abridge and move to a separate point, but I recall something that Ta-Nehisi Coates says, which is basically that, and he's kind of polemical, and he likes to, you may or may not know him, but he said there's nothing wrong with black people that getting rid of white supremacy can't fix. Now, I already kind of
Good
started
point.
to allude to the sleight of hand in that statement, which is no matter what you then say, he will say it's because of white supremacy. Like there, you can hide, white supremacy and systemic XYZ, blah blah blah. So he said, and what is your response? The question is, what is your response? What do you think of this statement that there is nothing wrong with ADOS, let's say, that getting rid of white supremacy cannot fix? Dr. Thunder.
Yeah. That's a tempting thing to answer in a number of ways. I'm going to say that all of the problems in the black community are not artifacts of white supremacy. Okay? I'm going to say all are not. However, I would argue that what got the ball rolling and has expanded dysfunction as the common thing clearly is white supremacy. So even if you got rid of white supremacy, you would still have now a tradition of dysfunction, and you'd have to figure out how to get rid of that because it's not going to be some sort of magic trick. Poof, all examples, all artifacts, all byproducts of white supremacy, poof, they disappear. That's not the way that it works. You still going to have to do something about Keisha with her multicolored hair, and you could still have to do something about, all of the other, unhealthy and bogus stuff that black folks do. You're still gonna have to, you're gonna still have to figure out what to do with that. So,
okay, so I believe Mike V, and then we'll get to Mr. LAR in the building. Okay. Now, Mike V, if you can hear me, I believe you've been hearing the conversation, or maybe you have not. But basically, we're talking about reparations here. That's the first topic we're kind of addressing. That's the main topic that we're addressing. And this is reparations in San Francisco. Okay. $5 million per eligible black adult, $97,000 for 250 years, getting rid of tax and debt burdens, and a home in San Francisco for every family, black family, for $1. Okay. And we can start with this basic question and then you can expound upon it. But does San Francisco or California actually owe this? How would you answer that? And what do you think about the proposal? You can add things such as, is it feasible? Do you think this is just a gesture that is not going to go anywhere? That's why they put such amounts, and they're not putting it in the kinds of terms that typically would pass muster, right? And then that could be spread throughout the country, let's say, like in terms of programs and whatnot. Mike V, go ahead.
Hey, thank you for having me on the panel. This is feasible. $5 million is actually feasible. If you think about how much money they spend on San Francisco and the state of California's military protected, ambush protected vehicles, $5 million is 2 vehicles. And so it's not that big of a deal. They have that sort of money just laying around in their coffers. In fact, California has something like 10 to 15, $20 billion sitting in their coffers. They can do things like this at the drop of a hat. That being said, the idea that was proposed by Dr. Thunder, that if you got rid of racism, you still would have to deal with Keisha. I mean, historically, that's just not true. Coming out of slavery, the literacy rate for Black people was around 1 and 1.5%. By the 1900s, by 1898, 1900, literacy rate shot up to 90%. That's practically because of the intervention from the federal government with Reconstruction, able to build their own schools, able to build their own businesses, and able to increase their own literacy. And so they were able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, so to speak, that everyone claims that they should, and they did exactly that. That has never been done in human history, for a group of people to move from a non-human status to a human status to a full participatory participation within the system. And so we know that this can happen if the resources are available, if these structural systems are intact and in place.
I wanna ask you, Mike V.
Mhm.
One question you may not have the answer to, but it's just a question of, like, empirically, if one were to run the experiment, if one were to think systematically and in the model wise, one will have to consider the differences between now and then, right? Is it the case that the situation would run, the experiment would run the same way if you were to, quote unquote, give Keisha money? Well, not give Keisha money, but, kind of fix the situation whereby Keisha feels safe. Now we're just talking about, generally speaking, with women, they want resources. Okay, this is nothing new, right? And they want resources, and they want to be in a community that where they think that, they can be protected and provided for. If I'm shorthanding your statement there, that hey, if that money is there, if that support is there, things will get in line. So, is that what you're saying? And do you think that it will happen this time around, or are we just in a different situation given technological, economic, blah 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 differences, cultural things that have happened since then? Or perhaps what I would say is, does it even matter? Just maybe just break it, let it, quote unquote, let it burn, start a new thing. If you may respond, please, to that jumble of jambalaya.
No, yeah, I mean, the quote unquote Keisha is just a symptom of the environment itself. Once you fix the environment, that sort of thing just goes away almost immediately. We've seen that throughout history in this country, that once the environment is stabilized economically and structurally, things start to change almost overnight. So the money is just a bonus aspect to it. Now, whether or not they're going to actually do it is another question in itself. But the feasibility study does make a lot of sense, that you have to actually evaluate the many different avenues to go down in order to compensate people who are disenfranchised by the system itself. And so the Black people aren't the only ones in California, obviously, but they have been pretty much gentrified out. I think the percentage, 1970, I think that, California had something like 25% Black people or something like that. I think they were like 25% of the population. Now they're only about 8% of the population. And so, when you think about redlining and other structural inequalities that have basically driven Black people out, yeah, those people should be compensated for, for the mishaps that had happened before through these legal means and illegal means.
So if I can, so you think that all of the dysfunction in the culture, you fix the economic system, basically. You fix the lack of funding, the lack of resources for Black people, and you think that the dysfunction will just disappear because it's embedded in the music, and even when given good choices, it's obvious to me that for the most part, a disproportionate number of Black folks prefer the choice that is actually going to do damage to them and to their community. So you think that is going to go away?
Yeah, that's been proven throughout history that those sort of things do go away.
Okay.
Shout out to the super chatter. I agree. Okay. And we'll get to LAR. And but I don't know, what is this? Is this $1, Kaizo? Is it 83 cents now? I know the Kenyan shilling, which is what that is.
It's like 83 cents. Yeah, our shilling is grown a bit weaker, but yeah.
Yeah. The dollar is going to be devalued in the coming as a result of the incoming bank savings that is going on both in Europe and the United States. So you will get back to up to $1 again, Kaizo. Worry not, and then you can go. Your tricking fund will be will be buoyed up. But Mr. LAR, what are your thoughts about the proposition by San Francisco? Okay, the $5 million, the $97,000, the getting rid of the debt. What do you think about that? And do you think that is something that can be copied in other jurisdictions?
Sorry, I'm late. First and foremost, it can be copied. I guess the language has to be right with it, because at the end of the day, can it be copied? Can it be done? Yes. Um, I think, ironically, I think people have an issue with it, and I don't really. It's kind of hypocritical to have an issue with stuff like this because pretty much every other group in America has got something from the government for whatever happened to them. So for when people come out of the woodworks when it comes to us, it's kind of like it's it's kind of like evil and hypocritical. You know what I'm saying? So to me, yeah, it could be duplicated everywhere because all the BS that this country has done to us has been everywhere across the country. And the crazy part is it took money to do all of the things that they did to our community. They didn't have a problem spending money to sabotage us. So yeah, it could be, I think what people are trying to basically do is nitpick a bunch of people out of getting reparations. Because even in the San Francisco situation, you got to be there a certain amount of years and this, that, and the third. So basically, everybody you ran out of the state is going to move somewhere else and they deserve nothing. It's just the people who were able to take the lumps for decades. So, but yeah, I think it can be duplicated.
Not bad, not bad, not bad. Okay, so Mr. IC3, I want you to kind of because you're committing. I sensed, I got the whiff of you committing certain mortal sins in what you said. The sin of Pan-Africanism was number one, which is to bring in the broad umbrella, to go beyond the United States, right? Because we say, hey, is this
Right.
particular jurisdiction,
Yes.
is this particular jurisdiction culpable, or is it the United States? And you say, no, it's a global thing, and African peoples, and this and that, and so on and so
Yeah.
forth. Let me ask you to kind of defend yourself in that regard there. Like, if you were to defend yourself amongst people here, we have African Americans, okay? And
Yeah.
what do you bring into the table with your view and your program, if you will, that would benefit if they were to take on your globalist Pan-African point of view? Can you defend yourself in a succinct way?
Okay. Let's try to approach it a different angle. Okay. And I like to see some challenges here. Basically, we know that people classified as black were brought over as stock. It's just business. Yeah, it's just business. These are not
Well, that was succinct.
I thought.
Sorry, here he comes.
I
He's
thought it was
back.
right
Here we
in
go.
it. Okay.
Here we go.
So watch this. Yeah. So so black people classified as black were seen as stock. It's just business. It's okay. So we have gold, we have diamonds, we have animals, we have horses. Buy and sell, buy and sell. Okay. So for a long time, black people were fighting to become seen as people. Yeah, I'm a man, I'm a person, I'm a human. Why? They're fighting to be seen as human, to be seen as people, so that then they could get access to the justice system. You see, because a horse can't seek justice. Yes, so there's a battle of are you stock or are you a person and a part of society, part of the system? So therefore, you fight to become accepted as human. Let's say that 3/5 of a human or whatever, to become accepted as human. Therefore, once you become accepted as human and part of the system, then you can start applying for justice. Yes, and all kinds of things like so. The concept of seeking reparations and being accepted as part of the American state, yes, and then to receive the reparations and still be inside that state, which is fundamentally built on the system of racism itself, you're just bringing yourself into the same system. I'm saying you have to create or build another entity, another sovereign entity outside of that state to then deal with that state. Does that make sense?
I like it. I like it, and it was actually quite succinct. I like it. This is it's a high level concept. You're basically saying, hey, well, on the one hand, on the human hand, you're like, hey, I am a person. These are my roots. This is my people. We're over here. It's a Pan-African thing, or you create some state, or you create a Black worldwide identity that you are part of. This is the Black nation, that kind of a thing. And then, and the Black nation is receiving, the people in United States that are part of the Black nation are receiving reparations. And therefore, and it can also then be, on a more practical sense, there may be some engine, right, that it could feed that helps that whole Black nationhood. You are not a bad job there. And I don't know, does anybody have Dr. Thunder, any pushback on on the Pan-African dream?
Well, the only pushback is that it perhaps is a dream. And
perhaps. Okay, perhaps it's a dream. Okay. Well, one can dream. LAR, did you have something to say?
Could I just come back on that dream? See, that dream is about trust. You see, you're trusting the system, and the trust, the dream, the concept of a dream and trust, they go together. That faith. So if you have faith in the system, right, your dreams are with the system. Your dreams are with the white supremacy. You dream into the future, investing into the future, into the stability of white supremacy and its system. That's the dream. So I'm counter that dream. I'm anti that dream. I'm dreaming for the sovereign Black entity.
I see.
Go ahead, LAR.
Like you said, it's a trust thing. I think sometimes when we think of America and we think of Black people and white people and people outside of America looking at quote unquote like Black Americans, it's this idea that it comes off sometimes that we don't have our own mind. And like when you said earlier about, it being business, these people knew it wasn't business. If it was business, then reparations would just be business. It's beyond business. These people knew that our ancestors were human beings. They didn't care. And their ancestors didn't care. That's not business. And the problem with that is, I think sometimes everybody in America, like most people know the underbelly of this in America, but sometimes they don't speak about it. When we act like everybody else who's playing just business, everybody wears a thong and a skirt at that point. So that lets us know it's not just business. See, if I come in your house and it's just business, bro, what's the problem? Then it's no, the police, God, the FBI, the CIA, Jesus. It's like, oh, I thought it was just business. So a part of the Pan-African thing is we do have a level of distrust, because in some essence, you're trying to tell us some of the people that help put us in this position want to link up if we get reparations so we could share with them, as if we don't see that's a hustle. And that plays on us being stupid and not having our own mind. Like we have people hustling us at the Black people in America. A foreign hustle is not gonna go over our heads, because ultimately, if it was such a caring event, because you could say in America we really pushed the Pan-Africanism for decades with no response. So when it was love and free and we want to unite with Africa, it wasn't that kind of resemblance. Same thing with the Caribbean. It wasn't that kind of resemblance. So what you have is people looking at it like, no thanks. Because we're supposed to be family, but we're only family when it's conveniently beneficial to you. So that lets us know we're not family, just like we're not part of the human family also. So it's like it doesn't end well. There is no olive branch that people are really extending.
Now, Mike V, I want to know if you have any kind of response here to this general kind of Pan African talk, because LAR has given us the family aspect of things, right? In terms of family feeling and whatnot, and perhaps you might address the aspect of, is it necessary for there to be a kind of some kind of outside entity or a superstructure, if you will, such that you're not stuck within the system, collecting from the system, so on and so forth. Or you say, F it, no, I'm American, I'm within the system, just want to get mine like everyone else is here. I don't need to kind of extend, create roots somewhere else, create some kind of superstructure and mothership. Go ahead, Mike V.
So it's really important to understand, the origins of Pan-Africanism. It started with the Haitian Revolution and the overthrowing of the French. Anybody who was enslaved, who stepped foot on that land, were now free. They gave them sovereignty. And that's basically what Pan-Africanism is about. It's about sovereignty for African-centered people. It's not really, what is being proposed in some of the mainstream spaces. I mean, I think it has transformed itself, through social media, but I do think that the origin aspect of it still holds merit, and it still is playing out today. I mean, we see that with the African Union, we see that with CARICOM, we see that with the Pan-African Congress that's even going to be happening this year in August down in Colombia. We see that there's a disproportionately large, the biggest Black community in the Western Hemisphere outside of Africa is in Brazil. It's 200 million of those folks down there. So when we want to have this conversation about Pan-Africanism, you can't fight white supremacy, in San Francisco and then think that your job is done. That has to be done on a global scale. White supremacy is global. The fight must be global. And no one ever questions that when it comes to Jewish people in Israel. There are people born in the United States who have Israeli passports and have citizenship over there, and they can serve in the military, and they get all the benefits of the state itself. We need to be operating under the same auspices that when it comes to Black people collectively in Pan-Africanism, that the doctrine says that we should be cooperating with each other on these terms and bases, and that we can actually go further if we go together. But you can go faster, if you want to go alone. If you go alone, you can go faster. I think that's the proverb. Mm-hmm. And so we need to be working together in order to stymie this. There is a reparations movement in the Caribbean going at the British and going at the French and going at the other European states. The South Koreans have a reparations battle right now with Japan over World War II. Even last year, they almost came to military conflict over it. Germany finally finished paying off Russia for reparations of what they did in World War II, I think a few years ago. Everybody else even Poland right now, as we speak, Poland is pressuring Germany to pay reparations for what they did in World War II. And Germany is even, standing up and saying, no, we're not going to pay reparations. Not going to pay reparations to Poland, but they're going to pay reparations to Israel. Israel wasn't even a state when World War II was going on. And so we have to look at all of these sort of dynamics as a reference point as to what is happening, how is it happening, and who's benefiting from it, and how do we actually apply it to our cases here.
Very well put. Very well put. Yes, I know you're a systems kind of guy, and I also know that you do talk about global things, and you understand that kind of that we do live in a even if you didn't want to do it. The world these days is too open. Ever since we had electricity, the internet was, or shall I say, connectivity was inevitable, and you cannot hide in a particular corner. So very well put, Mr. IC3. I think you gave your succinct case, and I think that it was addressed. It was given its due. You have some feedback, some pushback, some and perhaps some support even. Let's broach another topic. This is a topic that actually came up in our conversation last week. In the conversation last week, education came up with regards to performance of Black people. Let's say Black boys, education wise. And I recall, Mike V, you brought up the aspect of the schools and being funded by local taxes. And then this whole money thing comes up. Money is one thing, administration and how you spend the money is something else. So let me go ahead and talk about what is going on now. What is the latest with regards to the point that we're going to take up in order to have this conversation about education? Basically, the Texas Education Agency. So think of it as a state agency, one of the largest states in the United States. Or is it the largest by land mass? You can correct me, LAR. But we know Texas is Texas, okay? Texas is Texas. Texas is taking over the Houston School District. The Houston School District, I believe, is one of the largest. It is urban, quote unquote. It's large and it's urban, and the Texas is coming to take it over after a long slugging battle over the status. After the state's proposed interventions, after one school failed to meet state standards for 5 years. So school is failing. Some other schools are not up to par, according to the Texas state. And there's a lot of pushback as though this was necessarily a bad thing. The thing that I see, just as an outsider looking in, is it's just administrators quibbling over control. In other words, if the Houston school district, right, because heads are going to chop off. It's like Elon Musk buying Twitter or something, and people are just like, it's going to be horrible. It's going to be, there is no real addressing of what the school, what Texas is going to do with regards to the school district. One of the things that the state of Texas is saying is that, hey, there's been a heavy focus on administration, teachers unions, and all kinds of top-heavy administration without focusing on schools and teaching and what have you, and not holding standards high. Kaizo, let's start with you again with repeating your statements about, because one of the basic questions we're going to start with, and we're going to go around the panel, is, okay, what's the balance between funds and the right allocation of funds? Because Mike V said last time it's about investment. Okay, investment is just one thing. Money is just a tool. But, it's like, well, how do you apply the tool? Where do I dig? Whom should be digging? How deep should I dig if the tool was a shovel, for example? Is important with regards to this farming enterprise, if that's the analogy we're going with. So, Kaizo, how did that lady in Europe or in Britain turn around that school, and was money a big aspect? I know that hiring the right teachers was a big aspect. Paying them money was a big aspect, but it wasn't about administration, so on and so forth. And there was discipline and certain other things. But what do you say about the balance between funds and the correct appropriation of funds and the right kinds of structures when it comes to education? Let's start with Kaizo.
Right. Obviously, funds is important, so I won't overlook it. However, it's clearly not the most important one. As I said last time, the lady, her name is Catherine Babul Singh. She's half Black, half Indian, and she had an idea of create this school that was, again, run by her with her own vision of discipline. She thought, okay, look, Black boys in general, right, minority boys who are coming from single parent households, the main thing that they're lacking is not funding in their schools, is actually discipline, simple discipline. Food, breakfast in the morning, lunch, during the day, and discipline. So she went out there, she, orchestrated all the things whereby she had no extra funding from anywhere. She had the same funding as the other schools. Actually, I think as a chartered school, technically, she had to do a little bit more private fundraising in the UK from the Conservatives. But the point is, she was able to set up the school, and this school is one of the best performing schools in the whole country. It's called Michaela Academy. All the results from GCSE, which is like our pre 17/18 exams, and then also the A levels, which is more of like a high school diploma. All of them, they're scoring in the top percentile in the country. So the point here is, yeah, if you want to tackle this problem at your typical sort of macro level perspective, yeah, having more funding, equalizing that funding will do something. But I don't think you should expect it to solve the problem, because if you don't go and tackle the underlying issue, which really is, especially for Black boys. I grew up in the UK. I know my sins. I know the sins of my friends. A lot of us were single parent boys, and every time that we disrupted in the classroom, what they will do is they'll put us out, and then they'll punish us that way. Now, what she does is she doesn't punish you harshly in the sense that she just puts you up in another classroom. She makes you do work in another classroom, not nonsense rewriting, scribbling things, but actual work. So it's more like as a productive punishment scheme that she has. It's a no nonsense, no strike. However, the point is, every punishment she gives you is actually helping towards you learning better. There's no exposing you, putting you back home, and then you're back another 3 weeks behind. So it's kind of like functional punishments that she has. So I say, yeah, money's important, especially in cultures where, let's say, you're integrating. Let's say if you're taking two schools, you're making them compete, or and one school gets to go to France and the other one doesn't, etc. That will create that psychological difference within the children from different schools, right? But at the essence of it, I think, again, I was a black boy in the UK. I knew my sins, right? I didn't go to school. I didn't turn up to my classes, etc. And I have my reasons, right? But the point is, discipline really is something that a lot of us lack. And not just discipline, guys, discipline with love. Because if you discipline the kids in a way that you're treating them like criminals, it's not going to do anything. But disciplining them in a way that you make them know, okay, you've done wrong, I'll punish you, but I'm still there for you on the other end. I think when it comes to, like, let's say, white supremacy, educational systems, they punish you and treat you like a criminal. I did a video on my channel actually last week. They were arresting 5-year-olds because a 5-year-old apparently kicked a teacher. How are you going to arrest a 5-year-old, right? 9-year-olds. There's something when you're going too far that you breed this culture of basically criminalizing black boys at a young age. So I say, yeah, discipline them, but discipline them with love, with the fact that you're trying to change and help them as opposed to punishing them.
Yep.
Shout out to you. Shout out to you. Okay. And we'll get to Mike V, and then we'll move to Dr. Thunder. And you didn't like school, just like Dr. Thunder didn't like school. Seems like there's a pattern here. You smarty pants types don't like to go to school. But Mike V, so let's dig in further here. Let's take that money is needed for everything, okay, generally speaking, but money is just a tool. You're an IT guy, you're a systems type of person. You understand that still the right type of system needs to be implemented. And there are certain kinds of areas where you cannot just expect money to equal the right kinds of results. I'll make one kind of demarcation. I'll call it, let's say, the physics lab versus political arena. In the physics lab, if you fund if you give funds and you have better experiments and you have better measurements and so on and so forth, because reality is the judge, you will actually get the output that you're looking for. Meaning you do experiments. That's what happens. Reality is the judge. But when you get into anything that is political, okay, and whether it's the UN or school boards or whatever, it is not reality that judges. Okay, as a matter of fact, they tend not to just say, okay, what is the outcome that we're looking for? Do we want to make the test scores or whatever chosen parameter? It tends not to be that way. It tends to be certain other things. So those places can absorb money after money after money, but without the right kinds of systems, whereby reality is not the judge, it will not go in the right direction. But having said all that, I want you to add to what you said last week with regards to the money. You said funding. But what would you do beyond funding? What are the right kinds of systems that actually do work? We cannot say that it is equal everywhere. What particular kinds of systems, perhaps within the United States, work better, where perhaps the discipline and the structure or the lack of criminalization and all those other kinds of things are implemented? What are your thoughts on the structural aspect of this, Mike V?
Well, my answer to that is basically there has been a number of studies on some of the efficiencies and deficiencies of public education for Black people, K through 12. And so there have been changes made over maybe the last generation in regards to that. That being said, money still plays a factor. If we don't spend the same amount of money on Black kids that we do on white kids, then we know that there's going to be problems later on down the line. And the factor here is infrastructure is the most important part. The other aspect is curriculum. You know, a lot of these, the most successful Black schools are always partnered with post-secondary institutions such as MIT, UC Berkeley, these sort of larger institutions. Those sort of schools in those sort of districts are the ones that are very successful. So we know that that system works. We also know that after-school programs are very instrumental. That's why you have the Boys and Girls Club. That's why you have some of these other things like National Society of Black Engineers and, the Hidden Genius Project, which has 99%, if not 100%, efficiency in terms of graduation rates for Black boys. And it's properly funded. So that's why they get the results that they get. And so money is always going to be a factor when it comes to public education. In regards to what's happening with Texas right now in the takeover of the Houston School District, which is one of the largest school districts in the country, this is another colonial project that has been sweeping the South from Florida all the way back to Texas. That they think that they have a better idea of how to manage predominantly Black school districts, and they want to break up these school districts and turn them into charter schools and give out school vouchers and things like that have been proven to be failures for the TEA down in Texas. Now, I don't live there. I know LAR lives there, so he could probably speak better to it. But what we do know is that what they're trying to do is try to stop what they consider to be "quote unquote" wokeism in these schools and prevent them from advancing.
So LAR, what is going on with Houston? And what do you think about what Mike V just said? Is this just the colonial masters in the state coming to take over Houston? Is it possible that they maybe have a better idea of how to run things, or is it just an anti-woke program? And wokeism, so the whole anti-woke thing, I think it's overused in terms of people who are going against woke. Some people even said that Silicon Valley Bank collapsed because they were focused on wokeism. And perhaps if the only thing that could be said is perhaps if you're focusing on other things as much as you focus on wokeism, you might get better results. Maybe is the best kind of argument for the anti-woke when it comes to the use for that kind of thing. So I'll grant you that, Mike V, that yes, the anti-woke stuff has gotten overplayed. But do you have any kind of a local report from the ground there, Mr. LAR? What's going on with the school district deal?
Okay. Is it part anti-woke? Yeah. Is it? But people forget that Houston is basically considered the most diverse city in America. And the Texas School Board is the people that are supposed to lay the foundation for supplying the curriculum and books for a lot of school districts in America. And if you go back a few years back, it was the Texas School District that wanted to make slavery immigration in the school books. So they wanted to rewrite history to make it look a certain way. Because it's not really, this stuff isn't necessarily about math, science, and blah, blah, blah. It's about history. That's what they're really trying to focus on. So it's kind of the Texas brainwashing of America. But it's not particularly for Black people. It's for everybody. You get what I'm saying? The other thing is Texas has a thing where, and there's been like this for years, where the top percentile, they keep switching it. It used to be like the top 15 or the top 10. I think it's now the top 5. But the top percentile of high school academically were automatically guaranteed scholarships to the Texas colleges. And what's happening over the years was you weren't really getting bang for your buck, because a lot of the schools the people who were really smart earned it, but there were a lot of people who cheated their way through. So now you're not really getting the bulk of minds that you thought you were going to get in Texas and from Texas to help out the city. So that's the other thing, but when you look at the schools, as far as the money aspect, that's what happened to a lot of the schools. Because what is it? Texas is like the second or third biggest landmass in America. I mean, Houston, because like Jacksonville, it's like New York, Jacksonville, Chicago, LA, Houston. It's all like it jumbles up as far as girth. So here it's just a bunch of different districts. So like we have HISD is the Houston Independent School District, but we have so many different ones outside of it. You got Cypress, you got Katy, you got Spring, you got Pearland, you got like every surrounding area, 360 degrees has their own little school district, so they can have better control over their kids. And what it really is not necessarily money here, it's football revenue. See, your school is going to get, your district and your school is going to get more revenue from sports revenue. Like where I live at, there are 2 high school stadiums next to each other. When I got here, one was there. They built another because they wanted to make more money. So now that's what, that's what the big fuss is really about. Because whether people want to hear it or not, Elon Musk is in Austin, and I think he's going to be here in Houston also. But what is it? Not Amazon, but Samsung is in Austin too. With all of these big colleges, Texas State, Texas A&M, what is the Baylor, Texas Tech, University of Texas, all of these, Rice, you're not getting the minds you used to get. So if this works in Houston, I'm going to just tell y'all, all y'all cities going to dumb down the same way. Because while we were talking, I was looking up the top high schools in Houston area, and there was one in there that I know for a fact was ranked lower as far as top schools in Houston, that everybody in Houston and around Houston says if your kid go here, that's actually for the smart kids. So they're not even getting it right ranking them here. And it's a public school.
So it's all a shell game, you're saying?
Yeah.
Now, Dr. Thunder, what are your thoughts in general about this situation? You're not a Texas guy, but you see a state agency taking over a local school district and saying, hey, this school is failing. Let me go ahead and take it over. We have to focus on results. There may be reasons why they're doing that. They may have ulterior motives, but is it not possible that they could? Well, let me not ask stupid possible questions. Okay, let me go back to the basic question of the one that I asked Kaizo, which is, what are some of the structures that you see out there writ large in American school districts that don't focus on teaching and the students, but rather are just a means of administrators glorifying themselves? It seems to be a big issue it's not just about schools, by the way. Okay, the police unions do this. Any place, okay, where, again, in the politics world as opposed to the physics lab world, any place where you are not necessarily you are not held responsible by reality. Let's say, for example, you're a heart surgeon. You either do good heart surgery or you don't. If you're a plumber, you either do good plumbing or you don't, right? And the market will judge you immediately. If you are in a place where there's a union and in a public sector union and it's you can hide somewhere, administration tends to metastasize, just gets big. And some argue it doesn't focus on the students and the teachers. Comment, if you will, on if what I'm saying is it all true? Is it at all a problem?
Yeah, I'm a teacher, and I've taught in public schools. I've taught in charter schools. My wife has taught in charter schools, and private schools, right? And then I'm an academic, and I'm a tenured professor. So I've seen a range of, from the inside, I've seen a range of different sort of philosophies on education and X, Y, and Z. Now, there tends to be a pretty negative general sort of thought about teachers' unions. And some of the more successful schools, they don't hire teachers that are in unions. So the union, the teachers that they employ they're not in a union. That's a pretty common thing that private schools, other charter schools even, that actually are doing a good job. Disproportionately, the teachers that are teaching at those schools are not in unions, and there's a number of reasons for that. But I'm not categorically against a teacher because they're in a teacher union or because they teach in a district that requires that. Okay. I have a lot of friends that are in unions and in the teacher union. And a lot of them are very sort of disenchanted by a lot of the stuff that seems to be a priority in a teacher union. I'll tell one story real quick. And this is back when I was a substitute teacher in Michigan. And I was a substitute teacher, and frequently I would get these sort of longer term substitute positions. And then I got a position that turned into a couple years in the same position. And the way it works is that you substitute consecutively for 30 days, and then your pay doubles and you get full benefits and insurance. And so it was a good deal. But my job was still on the chopping block because I was not in a union, and I was not in a tenured position. I was not in an official position, as it were. I was in a permanent sub position, different classification. And the teacher that I took over for, who was in the union, of course, and was a tenured teacher, she did a really poor job, and she inherited a program that had a large orchestra, and she, through mismanagement and just doing a bad job and also violating policies, she took a program that had something like 60 students in the orchestra down to, when I inherited it had like 9 or 10. So this is a pretty common a common issue, is that once you get tenure, often has been the case that people will start to coast, and then the union will protect teachers that shouldn't be protected, and will actually in the school will be easily able to fire people that actually do a good job. This is a regular occurrence. It's not it's a bit anecdotal, but from the experiences that I've had with teaching and conversations that I've had with a lot of teachers, this is a pretty common thing. Well, it turns out that the teacher was related to the person that was like the president of that was the superintendent of the school district. And so you had an issue there. You had some other issues. The school district had to go to her house to acquire instruments that she was supposed to never have on her personal residence in her garage. And they took all of those instruments back. It was actually against the law, and she was on an extended leave. So as I was teaching the class, or I was teaching for her, she was actually on an extended leave and was being paid. Right? So there's a lot of this kind of stuff that goes on. But meanwhile, there's still teachers are being underpaid, and the union needs to go to bat for the teachers, and X, Y, and Z. Now, they've done a number of studies that have showed that there's not necessarily this relationship between funding and outcomes that we think there is. Right? Usually there's some other factor that actually is more important than the actual funding, so long as the funding at least meets a certain level. And often all the advocating for more resources, it doesn't fully address the issue. There's a lot of other issues that are present. So should Texas have come in and taken over this school district. That's debatable. Do they actually know better than the local folks there? Probably not. And like I'm saying, it's a convoluted, challenging issue. It's got it's multifaceted and everything else, and it's not really a one size fits all sort of solution for these issues. On another point, I will say that though there is, unions historically have not been particularly beneficial for black people. Actually been quite derogatory and negative. If you look at the history of music unions, if you look in Chicago, for instance, so you have the oldest music union, which specifically was racist against black folks. You couldn't get a job. You couldn't even join the union. You had to start your own union, right, in order to basically counteract the racist practices of the other union. So you have a long history of racist practices of these unions, and basically unions were designed to be able to basically ensure that the white folks would have a position and that they could push out the black folks. That's basically what the unions were doing, and so I'm not surprised that we have a lot of the issues in the education system and not prioritizing the black boys, and seem to be resistant to actually fixing issues, doing things that will actually, improve the situation. I'm not surprised, because unions in general have not been a pro-black, a for-black sort of, industry enterprise is what I want to say. The last thing I want to say, and I know I'm talking for a long time, but the last thing I wanted to say was I wanted to address this comment right here, which is somewhat related to what it is that we're talking about. So I will say,
could you repeat the question for those who are just listening?
Yeah. So if a melanin man or woman has a doctoral degree and a cozy job, is it racist to question how affirmative action had an influence? So there's a problem with the question. And the problem with the question does not acknowledge the fact that 84% of the recipients of affirmative action were white women. Okay? So that's an aspect that you can't just simply ask this question, because then you'd be talking about at most 16%, and then you'd need to cut that up also. How many of those disproportionately would have been women of that 16%? So then you can keep going to a lower and lower percentage to where we're getting to a place where this question is it's a disingenuous question. It's at least an ill-informed question, And then I'll give you one. Yeah, say it again.
But is it a racist question?
Is it a racist question? I think I think you can ask anybody whatever you want, whatever you want to. I don't know that. I'm not. I think there's an inherent bias with the way that the question is framed, because it doesn't actually acknowledge all of the nuance. Right? It doesn't acknowledge that. Okay, so you're saying as long as you're okay with asking all the white women how, if affirmative action had an influence on their hiring or not. As long as you're willing to do that, then I'll say, okay, it's not racist. But if you're targeting melanated folks which only would make up 16%, but you're implying that affirmative action was the only reason that they were hired. Yeah. I'd argue that is a racist question. Okay, I'm done.
All right. So let me drop a bomb on Mr. IC3 here as we wind down. Okay, Dr. Thunder said there's other problems that are associated with when we talked before about not affirmative action, but reparations. We talked about the Black community and other issues. I came up with a quote by Ta-Nehisi Coates that says, "Hey, if you get rid of white supremacy, you get rid of all Black problems." Mr. Mike V took one side of that issue, saying, "Hey, that if you fix the economics, things will work out."
Yes.
Dr. Thunder is skeptical as to that, things disappearing, because he's looking at the souls of men and saying, "I don't know, that stain there doesn't just go away." Now,
Okay.
if we talk about education, we're talking about, hey, the same kind of parallel, funding, okay, versus there's some other issues. So let's bring up
Right.
the third rail. Let's bring up IQ. Okay, that's good stuff, right? Let's bring up IQ and test results. Okay, so generally speaking, let's say we take basketball abilities, okay? There are many white people, okay? Many white people in the middle of the bell curve in terms of basketball abilities that are better
Yeah.
than many Black people in basketball
Mhm.
abilities, okay? But the mean of these two curves, of these two kind of bell curves, are offset in favor of Blacks, such that if you go all the way to the right tail, right, you're going to get predominantly Black people dominating that sport. Okay, same thing is argued with regards to test scores, ability in certain regards. Same thing. It's not just a racial thing. There's a man versus woman kind of argument as well. Um, so, and then we can bring out the biggest topic, which is IQ. We say, hey, look, there's a right tail also with Black folks. You have Black folks like Glenn Lowry, Professor Jim Gates that are out there, working on supersymmetry. You have people like Dr. Thunder. Yeah, sure, you have a right tail. But if you compare with other populations, there's going to be a gap in the middle in terms of the average, right? The mean. Hence, if you go all the way to the super right tail, comparing both of them, you're going to find disproportionately the group that has a higher mean, even though most people are and it needs to be mentioned that most people are average, right, which is the truth. Hence, no one, if you're in a group that has a higher mean, a higher average, you can't start beating your chest. You're just an average person, okay? You're not any smarter than blah blah blah. Just because you're Black doesn't mean you're going to beat a white person in basketball. That's not how it works. You're talking about right tail distributions. Now, Mr. IC3, what do you say to this? Because there's a kind of a evolutionary psychology, or not, an evolutionary argument to it that has to do, growing up in the equator versus growing up in the north, and the kinds of things you have to do with regards to planning and critical thinking and farming and storing your food and organization and blah blah blah, that will give rise to the kinds of cognitive abilities that the IQ tests for. So we can grant you that, hey, the IQ is testing for a particular kind of thing, okay, and that a particular group has developed those particular kinds of skills, and they have a different mean, such that if you go to the end, the right tail, you should not be surprised to find a disproportionate representation of said group. You can see what I'm saying here.
Yeah.
What is your response to that? Is this all just blatant racism? Charles Murray apologist, or is this feasible? Is this possible? Is this, should we contend with this openly and ask the question scientifically? Well, why should it not be the case that different cognitive capacities were developed such that there's a difference in the mean that will show up most drastically in the right tail of things, Mr. IC3?
Okay. So I want to address this in two parts. So let's do with IQ, and then the first part is talking about education and schools, and is it money, or is it teachers, and is it the teachers not inspiring the pupils enough? How I see it, the statement, how I address it, is that money is the weapon of white supremacy. Yes. You see, how it works is, you see, when the funding is used to keep the black people locked in. You see, to keep them following the dream, yeah, to keep faith, to keep trust in the system. So the money is held is close to hold them in that position, right? But to keep funding or allowing the money to flow into the black community, it's very expensive on the system of white supremacy. So what they try to do is try to withdraw funding and money and finance and support slowly and gently, so that you don't see that the money is being withdrawn, and that black people are falling into more abuse. Yes. So what happens as they're withdrawing? Sometimes they go too far. They withdraw the financial support too far, and then black people, just like the Black Panthers, they end up saying, well, we lose trust, we lose faith in the system of white supremacy. And once they lose faith and trust within the system, right, that's the danger. Once that drops too low, then they come together. Now that's the danger. Because once they come together, black people start organizing. Okay, you don't want us, you're abusing us, we're not accepted. We got it. We're going to come out, we're going to organize ourselves, just like the Black Panthers, and then the situation starts to go like this, you see. Then the black people start looking after themselves, start building Tulsa, Black Wall Street, all this. And then the white people say, oh, whoa, it's wonderful what you're doing. You're very clever. Oh, what are you doing? And they start asking questions. Start doing research. What are the black people doing? How come things are changing? And then they start investing money and funds to get back in. And then black people fall to the same trick and say, oh, the white people have changed their attitude to us. Let's get together. Let's work together. And then when the money starts coming in, and then when the money starts coming in, then it's back down. Lock the black people back down. But anyway, black people get a chance to opt out of the system and then become sovereign, start moving towards sovereignty. Then the whole dynamic changes. And then they have to use money as a weapon to get back in. And so that's the relationship. That's the game. It's continually played like this. But it's too expensive to stay too close. And so sometimes they lose it. And so that's the principle that applies in education, in all the state systems, when they start throwing the money at you. And plus, going back to what you're saying about IQ, you see, what is IQ? The measurement of IQ, the measurement of intelligence, is going to be different from this perspective than from this perspective. Because if these people are stupid, why when you extract white supremacists from them and they're left to organize themselves, all of a sudden these stupid people, these people of low IQ, all of a sudden they're dominating everything. So how are you going to measure that in kind of that intelligence? How come they were successful when they were allowed to organize themselves without you? When they lost faith in the dream, in the white dream, when they lost faith in it, that's when they got power.
Okay, so you sidestep the possibility question about whether or not it is unreasonable, just like basketball abilities, to talk about other abilities that kind of co-evolve within groups. But I'm not gonna hold you to that. Now,
No, it's reasonable,
Kaizo, and also
to talk about.
yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I see you're saying, okay, it's reasonable. Okay, fine. But politically and polemically, you're not gonna take up the point because of other considerations. I understand. And that's not the main thing we're talking about today, anyways. And we're beginning to land the plane. Kaiser, you heard what I said. Okay, I'm talking about the right tail of distribution. I'm talking about something that dovetails with education, affirmative action, and all these other kinds of things. We're saying that, hey, is it not reasonable that if you have this gap in the middle, in the mean, just like you have with athletic abilities, that it's not just for physical attributes. It could also be for things such as IQ measurements. And you could argue that IQ is not the only thing that measures success. As we know, you're a physicist. I'm an engineer. Our boy Einstein was not a Mr. IQ guy. He was a Mr. Intuition guy. As a matter of fact, intuition is what creates the leaps. Okay, intuition creates the leaps in most disciplines. It's not, calculation power. Calculation power is great for working within the paradigm, building the paradigm. But the person who's going to shift the paradigm tends to be doing something that is within the realm of imagination. And imagination is not properly represented in these kinds of tests. So you can say, hey, maybe imagination and the spirit of creativity and jazz. I'm not coming for you, Dr. Thunder,
Yeah.
but it could help in the enterprise of, let's say, physics. You could grant that, but should we shy away from the possibility of this actual difference in the mean with regards to this particular one dimension being tested with either standardized tests or IQ tests? Kaizo, what do you say about that? And also kind of give your closing thoughts there. Uh-oh.
You
Is
there, right, Kaizo?
You fall asleep, you dusty bastard. Anyways, let's move on to Mike V. You heard what I said. What do you think about this? Okay, different attributes being on bell curves, and what is being tested for, differently developed in different groups. And is it possible? Should we have the stance of, hey, this is a legitimate empirical question? Go ahead, ask it. Or should we kick people out of the hall if they bring it up and just scream white supremacy? Okay, even though we can admit that this particular one dimension of the vector that points towards success, this one dimension measured by the test, is not all is not all that makes up this vector, but that there's certain other aspects, as I've mentioned, that we know. Same thing with Feynman, by the way. Feynman had like a 120 IQ, but he was very intuitive, very kind of a different. He was also like a polymath. It tends to be the case that you have these polymaths who do many different things. He was a drummer, and he was this, and he was that, and he had great intuition, and he made a lot of changes in physics as well. So let me come back to the basic thing about, should we admit as a legitimate empirical question the difference in the mean in IQ and just put it to rest, or do we keep on fighting it?
I think it should be put to rest. I mean, IQ only exists in the social structures of white supremacy itself. I mean, if you go back through history, Africans didn't really identify uh, any sort of measure like this. And technology came out of Africa. Whether we're talking about iron, masonry, other sorts of innovations, they didn't use that kind of measure. Let's look at American slavery for that matter. A lot of your modern inventions came from Black men: the mailbox, the dustpan, the mop, the broom, uh, the air brakes on tractor trailer trucks and trains. That was designed all by one Black man, but there were a various amount of Black men who came out of slavery. One of the worst human tragedies in human history, and were able to innovate in ways that white men couldn't even have done. And so I think that when we start talking about IQ, I don't know if it has all that much relevance, um, to the victims of a system that is oppressive to them. And so I think we should do away with it. I think we should look at the history of how Black people got to where they are today. When we think about the pacemaker designed by a Black man. We talk about gas masks that helped the United States military fought off, chemical attacks, NBC, nuclear, biological, chemical attacks, came from a Black man. The torpedo came from a Black man. All these things change Western society and global society for what we know today. And so I don't know if there's any sort of IQ measure or any other measure that can actually evaluate or and give value to where we are as a people today.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you want to offhand dismiss it as irrelevant, even though you're not arguing against it. You're just saying, hey, this is irrelevant, and you're going with the other measures, and perhaps not even the measures. Okay, because, and this may be a different talk for a different day, because it's a question about, well,
Mhm.
what are the good ways of admitting or measuring merit when it comes to admitting people into, let's say, institutions of higher learning where there's limited resources and you can't just bring everybody in? But if one particular group keeps on not measuring up with regards to a particular test, how do you measure these other vectors or these other aspects of the vectors that have to do with success? Some of which we know, like this creativity, intuition thing, but how do you measure that and so on? Now,
Well,
LAR.
you had
Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say you had, Jack Johnson, who was not all that literate himself, who was able to create the wrench as we know it today, the monkey wrench. So how do you explain these sort of innovations coming from people who were not all that literate to begin with?
100%.
Now, I
The
think
question though is, how do you
yeah.
systematize a checking? How do you find a Jack Johnson? Do you interview him? Do you go do? How do you find him systematically? We have something called a test these days. But how do you augment that test to find these Jack Johnsons outside of this test parameter? That is the real thing when it comes down to public policy, right?
I think that matters in a black box sort of perspective, but I also think that basic literacy questions, like SAT or GMAT or anything like that, could actually give you a better barometer as to where that person or that demographic of people may be. And so in regards to a lot of the affirmative action cases that were tried a few months ago, we know that the black students outperformed the white students in terms of getting into post-secondary education institutions like Harvard and some of these other places like MIT. And so I don't know if we can actually find a true measure, a system to measure, but I do know that it can't be, there has to be some other explanation for why a demographic of people who have been largely oppressed the last 200 to 300 years can do what they do. And that's not really found anywhere else in the world.
100%, 100%. And Mr. LAR, okay, I'm going to put the question to you this way. Okay, you're dominant in basketball, right? You recognize that, hey, there's a difference in the mean, there's a difference in the bell curve between black and white on the extremes when it comes to athletic capacity. Or I like to give the example between the Kenyans and the Filipinos. Okay, no one is going to argue that the Kenyans don't have an advantage when it comes to running marathons. The Filipinos are not going to be like, oh no, that's fine. But is it not, or do you push back against when there is a difference in cognitive capacity? Do you push back against that? Can you accept one and then push back against the other? It's not about, and then you can say whether it's relevant or not. But I'm trying to get at something here. What do you think, LAR?
It's similar, but it's different. You can be good and great at basketball and have a high IQ for a sport, not because of your physical abilities, but because you have the ability to actually play the game without being cheated because the crowd knows the rules. That's not the same as in academics and business. IQ is a little different thing because you can basically take an IQ test from 2 years old to 8 years old. So in this country, it's kind of interesting because while people don't use IQ results, and schools don't use IQ results to actually put the smartest kids ahead. They use the IQ results to dumb people down. So you can have a high IQ at the age of 5, 6, 7, and 8 and sound completely moronic by the time you get 18. And nobody figures out what happened. And it's the school system, it's the teachers. Teachers have done that for as long as I know about school. And if you look back at the history of the United States, you'll come to find out, one of the IQ issues is, especially in our communities, teachers sabotaged a lot of the students. It wasn't that the student was dumb, it was that the teachers didn't want the smart student to be smart.
That's right.
So, thus the concept of, black men in particular, we got is sports and entertainment. That's what you do to make money. But ironically, if you look up billionaires of other races, in America, it's only one. Vera Wang is the only Asian billionaire from America. There is no Hispanic billionaire. But when you get to black people, you got STEM, you got sports, you got entertainment. So what does that tell you about IQ? Our IQ is pretty doggone high to be to be able to be successful in this country with multiple different people, whether they be multimillionaires or billionaires, doing multiple different tasks. And ironically, like V said earlier, we invented a lot of things in this country that other people got rich off of. So IQ is interesting in America because you would say that the person who invented, let's do it this way. You say Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, but Lewis Latimer is the one who made the electrical current light with tungsten. And Nikola Tesla is the one who did from alternating direct current to alternating current. But Lewis Latimer was a slave before he was a scientist. So, and Thomas Edison has an energy company. Nikola Tesla worked with what is it J.P. Morgan Chase or Westinghouse to become a rich man. He died broke, but he was a rich man. What happened to Lewis Latimer? Was it his IQ? That's the American way. Because we say it's just business. Hey man, you could be a smart guy, but I'm gonna rip you off, and what can you do about it? How smart can you be to outsmart the system? But I'm sorry about that. Long-winded.
No, that's a good response. I like the fact that you created this difference in the difference between, let's say, a physical a sport where the rules are clear and there's not a lot of crazy noise, social input, blah blah blah, versus something which is cognitive, where things are kind of complicated and complex. Very well put. Now, Dr. Thunder, and along with your closing thoughts, we have to wrap it up. We're approaching the 2-hour mark on what has been a great conversation. And again, case closed every Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern time. Highest level conversation on the most relevant topics. Okay, go ahead and click that like button. Click the subscribe button if you've not subscribed already. Share the stream. Super Chat is still available. Support the channel. Become a member. So, Dr. Thunder, is it a good empirical question? Okay. As a scientist, it may not be one that you pick up, but do you have any pushback against the study of the differences in groups with regards to cognitive capacity, as we would study the differences in groups with regards to other psychological attributes and physical attributes? Is it not reasonable to say, hey, even because a big part of the problem, because most people are not on the right tail, right? But whenever it is brought up, they feel a certain way about it, as though, well, you're saying I'm dumber than the white person. It's like, well, no, most of you are just right there in the middle. You're much, blah, blah, blah. But is it a legitimate empirical enterprise? Can we remove the fuse? Can we kind of remove the stigma out of this? Can we make it less of a third rail and say, hey, go ahead, test it? But it really doesn't matter because there's some other things. We have certain other arguments. We're going to find a way of measuring, perhaps, and pointing out to some of the things that were said about, invention and so on and so forth, measuring creativity, innovativeness, measuring intuition, and what have you. Is it a legitimate empirical enterprise to study differences in cognitive capacities between groups?
Yeah, I mean, really the question is capability, right? It's really capability. That's the question. And we've allowed one particular measurement of capability to be the crown jewel, the one that everyone talks about, IQ. But that's only one of the ways to, and it's only one of the measurements. There's all kinds of capability that human beings have. I would be for a broadening of the categories, not a sort of throw this out. Why does it matter if we can measure people's capability or not? I still think it's a valuable thing to measure capability, but that we just need to expand the categories. And there's lots of other things to consider. I would also argue that there's a lot of pushback against IQ as being it's European standards or whatever that we're measuring. We're using, biased questions from a European perspective, and all this kind of thing. I don't find that to be particularly persuasive, because really what the information is less of an issue. It's how you're able to manipulate the information, right? You need something. You have to be manipulating something, and you need to have sort of a common pool of information. And however that pool of information became common, we could have an issue with that. We can say, well, white supremacy caused this information to be the common information. Okay, but I'll agree with that. But as far as the person's ability to manipulate and have a mastery of that information, that's a different question, right? So I'm not necessarily against IQ per se. I just think we also need other measurements, and those other measurements need to be weighed on the same level. In the past, when we've had, the other, a list of other criterias to measure, that's been the case. But when everything is said and done, IQ still ends up emerging as the top, considered criteria, and the way to say, hey, we're better than you because of this. Well, seems to me that groups should also be able to say that they're better than you based on one of these other criteria. Because really the most important thing is capability. What can you actually do? Right? In colleges and universities, the whole broadening the mind thing, that's wonderful. But what can you actually do? And I think what you can do, however you get there, that's actually the most important outcome. It's not how much mental gymnastics you can put yourself through. It's what can you do? That actually, in my mind, that is the most important thing to consider. And I think there's lots of ways to measure that capability, not just so-called intelligence.
Shout out to you. Well, shout out to Mr. IC3 in the building. Third time, I believe, on the show. And shout out to Mike V. Okay. They say you're a real stand-up guy, Mr. IC3. Shout out to Mike V. Shout out to LAR. Shout out to LAR.
What does that mean?
Shout out to Kaizo.
Stand-up guy.
No. It's because when when it's your turn to talk, you always stand up. So that's
Okay.
That's what they.
It also has a different meaning because you guys in Britain don't. It means you're a solid dude, but joke-wise, you're a stand-up guy. Blah blah blah. Anyways, you stand up when you talk. Kaizo said, that he's got a maintenance guy in his house. Maybe we believe him, maybe we don't, but that's why he's not speaking. But he texted that. Shout out to him. Okay. Shout out to LAR and Mike V. As I said again, ladies and gentlemen, 4 p.m. every Sunday, Dr. Thunder's channel or my channel. This is where you get the highest level conversation. on the most relevant topics of the day. Anywhere in YouTube, anything affecting this particular corner of YouTube, but most especially, this is where you get that conversation. Go ahead and support this channel. Go ahead and become a member, like, share, subscribe, and maybe Dr. Thunder, you, me, and Kaiser can get on some other stream at some point and talk about that black box aspect, what Mike V called the black box aspect of creating these ways of delineating other ways of measuring capability. Because first of all, you have to define perhaps what are the relevant aspects of capability, make them distinctive enough from what IQ is measuring, figure out ways in which one could intuit and measure these things. Okay, I think that ought to be a worthwhile experiment. My thought on it, generally speaking, is I'm an empiricist. Like, I don't care what you want to measure, go ahead and measure it. Like, it's just fine. Like, I don't care what the results are. It doesn't matter. Like, I'm not going to get into some kind of groupishness about it, generally speaking. So, Dr. Thunder, that's all we've got. I don't know if you have anything else, but
no, that's it.
This has been another. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks everybody for coming through, and we'll see you next time on Case Closed.